Hello, everyone. Today I will present you a small presentation about CSS frameworks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the general concept of CSS frameworks and the advantages of using them, potential problems you can face when you are implementing them into a project, and direct comparison between regular CSS and CSS framework. So at start, it's only logical to talk a little bit about the basis of those frameworks, which is regular CSS, also known as the cascading style sheets. It's a crucial tool for any type of web development. It's basically defines the visual presentation of all of the web content. It gives you full control over all of the components of a web page, including stuff like text, content, buttons, colors, fonts, images, videos. It also works with the responsive design, which means how your web application will look on different screen sizes. And it allows you to create truly original and standout websites. As an example of simple CSS code, I provided, first of all, I provided an example of HTML component, a simple button with a selector or class, which is also a selector. And then in a separate CSS file, we are using that selector to apply some simple styles to it. There are different ways to applying styles to HTML element. You can apply them directly into the HTML, which is called inline styling, or you can also style those elements inside of the HTML file using a style tag. But it was always been the best practice to create a separate file and then just import it to your HTML. So about the CSS frameworks, those are basically packages and libraries that are containing pre-written styles, and sometimes they are also containing ready-to-use components, UI components, which means that not only they contain simple CSS, simple styling, they are also containing JavaScript, because those components are already ready to use. A simple example would be a slider from Bootstrap. You don't need to add any additional custom JavaScript or CSS. You only need to install a Bootstrap into your project, add code of that slider, and it will be already functional and ready to go. So the primary purpose of any CSS framework is to provide web designers with a starting point upon to build, allowing you to design and build websites more quickly and efficiently. I also provided two examples of HTML elements that were styled using different CSS frameworks. The first example is a simple button that was styled using Bootstrap that I already mentioned. You can see it also contains selectors. I'm talking about the utility classes. You can see the regular utility class btn, which means that this is a button. And for more specific styling, there are btn primary added, which adds some pre-styled CSS, which is provided by the Bootstrap itself. The second example is a little bit more complex. It's again an HTML button, but this time it is styled by another framework, which is called Tailwind. You can see that it's containing more utility classes, and that's because Tailwind has different functionality than Bootstrap. I will explain it a little bit more in the next slide, but just from looking at it, we can say that it allows us more detailed styling, and these classes means that this button has a background color, it has a text color, and paddings, left, top and bottom padding, and left and right padding, and also some type of border radius to make it rounded. So the variety of existing CSS frameworks can be divided in multiple groups based on the functionality that they provided and some custom characteristics. And the first group would be general purpose frameworks. Those are designed to handle a wide range of styling needs. They include pre-built component, grid system, and utility classes to create fully functional designs. A good example of general purpose framework would be Bootstrap, and I already talked a little bit about it. The really cool feature of Bootstrap is that not only it adds some stylings to your components, but you can implement already some UI elements like selects, drop downs, carousels, and navigation bars, and so on. As an example of Bootstrap elements, I added 4 standard Bootstrap buttons. One of the buttons I gave as an example in the previous slide, it was primary button. The same class semantics, we have a BTN in all of those buttons, and then more specifically for different colors, we have different classes: primary, secondary, success, and danger. Another group of frameworks is lightweight. From the name of this group, we can tell that the main focus of this framework is to make it as small as possible, but still providing some additional styling for your application. And like I said, they are really minimalistic. They weigh almost nothing, and the reasons for that is so that this third-party library will not affect the general size of your project, and also don't affect the performance of your pages. Obviously, with the minimal size, they don't provide a lot of functionalities. It's pretty limited, but still, it definitely enhances the default looks of your HTML structure. As an example, I provided some code from Milgram CSS, one of the minimalist lightweight framework, and the structure is pretty simple. The class names are also understandable. It's a simple two responsive columns. It has container, it has row, and 2 columns themselves. So another group would be utility-based group, and it also provides a wide range of different functionalities and possibilities to style your web application, similar to general purpose. But the key difference between those 2 groups is that utility-based are only focused on utility classes. It doesn't provide you any ready-to-use components. So it has some advantages and disadvantages, of course, and it depends on the use case of your requirements, if you want to use it or not. As an example, I again added a button. This time it's a little bit more complicated than before because it because it also contains a really cool feature that Tailwind provides, and that is inside of the utility classes, you can handle the hover effects. You can see the hover BG and green 700 class. It means that on hover effect, the background color of this button will change to a different color than it was before. It was green 500. Also, the example above I have a responsive div to represent the responsive possibilities of those frameworks. I didn't mention when I was talking about Bootstrap, it also allows you to control the behavior of your elements on different screen sizes. And in the utility classes, we can see that by default, this element has padding of 4 units. And then there is a prefix SM. This prefix means that on small screens, the padding will be changed. No, sorry, starting from the small screens, the padding will change to 8 units up until large screens. Then starting from the large screens, it will change to the 16 units. In Bootstrap, the technology and the way of writing these utility classes are pretty similar. It's just that they don't use columns before the breakpoint prefix. So it would be, and there is different order of the columns. So in Bootstrap, it would be P, then slash, then SM, and then 8. And in Tailwind, it's slightly different, but the logic and the functionality is basically the same. And one another group of frameworks is classless. It's pretty similar to the minimalistic lightweight group, sorry, meaning that it's focused on some specific styling, but maintaining the smallest possible size of this library. But also there is a difference here because these type of frameworks are not using utility classes at all. They are working directly with the HTML elements, meaning that you don't even need to add any classes to your HTML. You can just create a simple form, add, in this case, water CSS, the example I added as a classless framework. You just need to add this framework into your project, and basically that's it. You don't need to write any additional code. Your elements will be styled by the pre-styled classes that this framework provides. It's really lightweight. It's have limited functionalities, but for some simple examples of user interfaces, I think that it's not the worst option. And it's also pretty good option for someone who doesn't have any knowledge in CSS, because like I mentioned, you basically only need to write HTML and add this library to your project. In this screen, I have the same groups I was describing before with more examples of the frameworks. Some of them I already mentioned, like Bootstrap, Tailwind, Milgram, and Water CSS. Also have some well-known frameworks like Bulma and Foundation, Skeleton, Pure CSS, and so on. And there is another group I didn't mention, which is called specialized frameworks. Those are created for some specific cases, like for example, the Gutenberg. One of the examples is created for work with WordPress pages specifically, and the other one I think is pronounced Boiler, and it is only for creating HTML email templates, which in theory sounds really cool because creating HTML templates and styling them can be a real problem. And if there is such a framework that makes this process easier, maybe I'll try it in the future, because in theory it sounds really cool. So why would you even bother adding any type of third-party libraries into your project if you can achieve the same results by using the simple CSS? Well, the first advantage of those frameworks is that they make the process of development much faster, especially the initial development when you need to create an initial page for your application and then just extend it with this time and add more features to it. You don't need to write custom CSS. You don't, in some cases, you don't even need to write JavaScript for your components to be already usable. Also, you don't need to maintain the consistency of your styles. It's the second advantage of the frameworks. I will already switch to that. That the consistency, it means all of these components that you are adding in this framework will look the same on all of the pages. So you don't need to think about keeping your style sheets and your CSS files consistent. You don't need to think about class naming, which also can take a lot of development time. And it's been already handled for you by the developers of the framework that you are using. The responsiveness, like I already mentioned, it allows you to play with responsive. It allows you to control the behavior of your components and so on. Also, most of the frameworks are mobile first, so that's even their main focus, to create applications for mobile view. And cross-browser compatibility. Not much to say about this point. Basically, it means that you don't need to worry about how your page will be looking on different browsers, because in regular CSS there can be problems with certain styles on different browsers. As an example, I provided a navigation bar. It's using Bootstrap. It's already responsive. It is already functional. On the mobile screens, it already has a working burger menu and two navigational links, home and about, and the place for the logo, where you can add a logo of your application. And a little bit about the potential problems that you can face during the development process using any type of CSS framework. So the first and probably the main problem, it's code bloat. Some of the frameworks often include many unused styles, and it can, depending on the size of this framework, it can definitely increase the overall size of your CSS files, of your styling files, and which leads to performance issues and many other issues. Some of the modern frameworks are handling this problem in different ways. For example, Tailwind, as far as I know, it has a native technology similar to tree shaking, which means that on the production build, it gets rid of all of the unused code and makes the final bundle, CSS bundle, relatively small, which is a pretty cool feature for a CSS framework. But other example is Bootstrap, which doesn't have such functionality, and it can lead to serious problems with performance, because the Bootstrap is actually has pretty significant size. Learning curve. It also depends on the framework you are trying to use, because like I mentioned when I was talking about classless frameworks, you basically don't need to have any knowledge in CSS. You just need to add this library to your project, and your components will be styled. But that's often not the case. And when you will try to use Tailwind, for example, you will definitely gonna need to have some basic knowledge in CSS, because on the example I provided, the example of the code I provided, it contains a lot of utility classes, and for someone who doesn't have knowledge in CSS, it would be really hard to understand what's happening even after they read the documentation, which is also can be challenging for someone who doesn't have basic knowledge. So the learning curve can be a serious issue. Dependency on framework updates. Well, if your application dependent on any type of framework or library, it can happen that expected or unexpected update can just break anything or everything, which means a lot of refactoring, which means if your product was already on production, it leads to serious problems. So always need to keep in mind that depending too much on any type of framework can lead to serious problems. And overriding framework style. This can become an issue when, for example, at the beginning of your project, you build it with any type of framework, but as it grows, you need to add additional pages, you need to add additional components, and it requires styling, and especially if you will need to implement a specific design, then it can become a problem to override the default styles that you were using from the framework. It can lead to messy and complex CSS file in some cases. Again, some of the frameworks are handling it in different ways. They are allowing you to override those styles in less painful way in the configs, or using their pretty cool tricks with their utility classes. I'm talking about Tailwind. I also know that Bulma, one of the framework, also allows you to do that. And for the last part, I will talk about the direct comparison between using pure CSS or CSS framework, and I added some, in my opinion, crucial aspects. And the first one is the learning curve. Like I mentioned, it's one of the problems of CSS framework that learning curve can be challenging for someone who doesn't have the basic knowledge of regular CSS. Therefore, if you start from the CSS and then slowly move into the framework, it wouldn't be such a problem. But if we are comparing directly, then pure CSS is more definitely has advantage here. Control. When you are using pure CSS, you can do basically everything you want with your styles. There is almost no limitations. And comparing to the framework, it's much different because you are always limited by conventions, and customization will require some extra work and overrides. Code reusability, that's where framework can become really handy, because you can just reuse the same component anywhere you want. Of course, if the framework provides that, like Bootstrap does. And if you want to use that with the pure CSS, you will need to manually create CSS files for those components. design consistency. Well, the elements from the framework will always look the same in any page that you added them. You don't need to worry about keeping your CSS consistent and well structured, because it has been already done by the developers of the framework. And in pure CSS, it solely depends on your discipline and experience in building styling systems. Setup time, well, there is no setup time in CSS. Well, almost no. You need to create a file and import it into the page you want to style, or into the component. So basically, no additional work here, but like any type of framework, it requires some initial installation. It also is different between different frameworks. For example, Water CSS requires only additional installation, like in CDN, or just importing the link. And in the Tailwind, for example, it requires some extra steps. You will need to create a config file additionally to the initial installation in the CLI, for example. The performance, by default, CSS is lightweight because, well, the less styles you wrote, the less it weighs logically. If your application grows, the styles are growing with it, meaning it will also gain some size, but by default, it is really lightweight. The frameworks, like I said before, some of them are pretty large, and they are not handling the problem of causing some performance issues to your project. So they usually just include unused styles, and if they are not optimized, it can potentially cause you different types of problems. And flexibility, it's pretty similar to the control, that with using pure CSS, you are fully flexible, and you can create any design you want, but then in the frameworks, you are limited by the framework itself, and if you want to customize it, you will need to do extra work by overwriting and messing up your files potentially. And I think that's gonna be it. I will stop sharing.